What do church leaders need to know to be helpful with someone who's been betrayed?
What's up, you guys? Welcome to the Therapy Brothers podcast. I'm Brandon.
I'm Tyler. We're brothers.
We're therapists,
We're not afraid of your questions.
so bring it.
All right, you guys, we got a really awesome couple of guests on here today. We're going to jump into that in just a second and answer this question, which I think is a really pertinent question for a lot of people. This is a really common question that both Brandon and I see. First, you guys can see obviously that we're missing the better half today. Brandon decided to go out and do some elk hunting instead of do his job with me today. So I'm on my own, and I'll do my best to hold down the fort here. But before we do that, I just want to jump in, and we're going to get started with a review. And with these reviews, you guys, if you're listening to the show and you're finding value here, one of the best ways that you can help to spread the message is through these reviews, because that's how we get noticed in the places where we're putting these things. And so if you're finding value, please rate and review for us. It's not that we just love to hear nice things about us. We love to hear honest feedback too. So if you have the courage, please get on and share. But here's the review for the day. It says hope. It says, Brandon has been mine and my husband's go-to guy for years. We love the way he explains things and breaks them down so that we can understand. The podcast has helped us come from a place of shame and blame to understanding. So that's awesome. Thank you for the review. Brandon loves to feed his ego that way. So that's awesome of you guys to share. All right, let's jump into it today, you guys. We've got Scott and Melissa here with us with a really good kind of discussion question. Thanks for being on with us today, you guys.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, really happy to have you. If you wouldn't mind, why don't you guys just, with whatever you're comfortable with, share a little bit of your background behind the question, and let's just ask the question. We'll jump in and get started.
Okay, well, I guess I'll kind of go through my story then. My name's Scott, and I guess I've had a problem with pornography most of my growing up life, and I knew that lots of other people had the problem. I would kind of work on it, and I'd try to do better in things, and then I was able to be absent long enough to go on a mission and come back and find my lovely wife and Melissa and get married. And I thought that the problem would go away when I was married, and yeah, that's not how it goes. Spoiler alert.
Right.
And so then it seemed about like 6 months after we were married is when I came to that sad realization, and I hid it for a while, and then I found that I had to come clean to my wife, Melissa. And I had confessed to bishops when I was single before, and like church leaders, and it always it was such a powerful experience. It made me feel so good to finally get this weight off my back. And so yeah, I did the same thing when we were married, and I remember coming out of the bishop's office and actually just giving my wife a thumbs up, like, yeah, like I'm good to go now. And I didn't realize that whole backpack of guilt that I was carrying, I pretty much just tossed it onto her. Yeah. And so then she wasn't excited for me, and she wasn't happy for me.
Well, why not?
I know. I was like, oh, and then that even fed my resentment. I'm like, what's the deal? You know, like, this is a good thing. And then, and I didn't understand it. I didn't know what betrayal trauma was. The church leaders, I want to say first thing that I sustain all my church leaders, and they're called of God, and they've helped me in so many ways. It's just they don't know a lot about betrayal and how that works on a spouse. And so then there's that confession, and then because I hadn't yet, another thing is I feel like church leaders are apprehensive with the word addiction. They're kind of almost scared to use it because it's like, oh, we don't really want to label you an addict, you know? And so I was like, well, I'll keep going. And so, you know, I read more, and I tried to do better things. And like, you know, like a year or so later, I fell back into it, and I couldn't explain it. I didn't know what was going on. And so it was so confusing. And I think I've read a lot of different definitions for addiction, but the simplest one I've been able to think of myself is if you've done something to hurt the person you love most and you can't explain why, it's because you have an addiction. And we end up going through this cycle. It was about a 2-year cycle of me relapsing, hiding it for months. And the last time I hid it from her for like a year and a half. And that's when we were like, something's got to change. And so, but even with each confession, it got almost harder for Melissa, because, you know, we'd be there and they'd be like, okay, well, you know, Scott's in a really hard place, and you need to really support him, try to lift him up, and maybe you can, you know, go to him for a priesthood blessing now that he's worthy, you know, maybe that would help him, you know. And there's just a lot of things they would do to help me, but then I think Melissa just really felt forgotten.
Yeah, well, I feel like no one quite grasped the magnitude of what was happening in our lives, right? Like, it wasn't just singular acts of acting out. It was all the gaslighting and all the hiding and the manipulation, right? And so I feel like when Scott would share what was happening, I almost went through a grieving process of losing what I thought our marriage was, and that realizing that my reality of my life wasn't what I thought.
So it felt like our life had this big puzzle piece that was just missing, and we didn't know what it was. And
well, I feel like for him, they'd always mention, oh, you can go to 12-step and that might help. And then for me, because I didn't know where to go and who to get help from. And so I would go and I'd have my good cry, and they'd cry with me. And then I'd kind of just go home, right? And so it wasn't until this last time that Scott came home and he mentioned the 12-step for addiction. And then that's where I felt like something just bonked me in the head and was like, this is our missing puzzle piece. And there's something for me and somewhere I can go for help.
And I feel like no one had ever told me, like, you need to do this 12-step program, go check it out. And there was just kind of like, well, some people, you know, lots of people like it, it's a good thing. And so this time we were like, hey, like, we can't keep doing this cycle for the rest of our marriage, so something's got to change. So I started attending the 12-step, and that's when everything kind of clicked, because that's when I finally realized that I had an addiction, and that Melissa, and then we started looking for stuff, and we found Brennan, and we realized what betrayal trauma was. And then it clicked again, why Melissa wasn't so happy for me when I came and confessed. And that's when life started making a lot more sense.
Yeah, so I guess our big question that would have saved us years in the process is how our church leaders could have helped me and being the betrayed, and where they could have pointed us to grow and for us to like start our path of healing.
Okay, awesome. Great discussion, you guys here. First and foremost, just I can tell you guys have been on the road for a bit now.
Yeah.
It's kind of a rough road, but I commend both of you guys for being for being on it, and for the work that you're doing, and for the ability to come and share your story this way. So it sounds to me like, you know, obviously what we're talking about here, there's lots of different angles that we could take on this, but I guess just Melissa, I just would like to maybe come back to you for a second. You guys are talking in the realm of, you know, if I'm picturing this right, you start this journey, you've got this kind of sort of system set in place where the first line of defense that you go to for a problem like this was your church leaders.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important place to start with what you're asking about the church leaders, because for so many church leaders, they're in the positions that they are because they genuinely really want to make a difference, and they're really good people who are trying to do the very best they can. And a
Mhm.
lot of times they don't even know what to do in order to help, say, the betrayed side of this equation, because the focus has always so traditionally been on the person who's got the sin or the problem that needs the attention, right? So could you, for any one of those church leaders who might actually be listening to the episode here, and for anyone else who's listening who's got similar issues that are going to be working with a church leader, could you maybe just describe for me what the emotional process is and was for you through all of this, and what you wish you would have been met with that maybe just didn't quite happen, even though it was well intended by your church leader?
Yeah. Well, there's so many times that we did go to a church leader. So I felt like every time that it would happen, I'd grow a little bit more as a person. But I feel like the very first time when we were married, I think what would have helped is if someone would have helped me put the puzzle pieces together. Because growing up, I always was told, oh, a lot of men struggle with this, right? And so when we were dating, I asked Scott, and he's like, yeah, I did, right? But, I'm worthy, and I went on a mission. And so in my head, it was just kind of like, oh, okay, so that's behind us, right? And then when he acted out and he came forward the first time, I didn't quite put those pieces together, that it wasn't just a few times when he was younger, that it had been developing and growing for years, right? And so I think if I had a church leader just kind of ask the questions that I didn't even know how to ask or what to ask, it could have helped me understand more of the scope of what was in my marriage. Because I just really feel like it was almost a disservice to me that they didn't want to mention that this is signs of addiction, like addictive behaviors, that it was, just people make mistakes and we move forward. And I totally believe, people make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. But that's kind of what I relied on was, okay, Scott is being truthful and honest now. So that means moving forward, he's always going to be truthful and honest. And with addiction, it's a lot harder and a lot scarier. And so I feel like if I had a church leader that would just helped me put the puzzle pieces together and point in a direction of what could have helped us, would have saved us years.
And also there's a time and a place for everything, I think, and telling giving the impression to the betrayed spouse that you're going to have to forgive your spouse. That might not be, at the time of confession, that might not be the right place to talk about, like, there's forgiveness between the addicted and God, but that might not be the time or the place to talk about forgiveness from the spouse. And because I know Melissa always kind of got the impression like, okay, I gotta forgive, I gotta kind of just let it go, move on. And yeah.
Yeah, well, I feel like I almost went through a faith crisis a few times because I had all these hard feelings and they were overbearing and I couldn't let them go. And so I was like, do I not believe in repentance? Do I not believe in forgiveness? And that was really hard because it almost like allowed me to beat myself up because I was having feelings, which isn't right at all.
Right. Yeah. So I think that that's one of the things that happens frequently. Again, I don't think this is ever intentional, but I think it does happen frequently where, let's look at it from the Christian perspective and maybe take the prodigal son idea. If your husband, the prodigal, suddenly returns home, here's this church leader acting out almost as the father figure to welcome them back into the fold and kill the fatted calf and have this amazing experience. Like, thank you. We're so glad you're back and you're loved and it's wonderful. And in some ways, without really meaning to, it almost feeds the same pattern that's been happening all along with the addiction, which is the addiction is extremely self-centered and it's very centrally focused. And so sometimes what we miss in that, if we take the example of the prodigal son, is that there's a whole other son out there who has actually not really done anything to warrant needing to repent yet. And and of course that son is over there on the sidelines and he's struggling, right? He's experiencing some of the same things you're describing, Melissa, where it's like, man, like, what's wrong with me? Like, I should be happy that my brother's back and I should be glad, but I'm just upset because because I have these feelings here. And I think sometimes what would really help is if there was some level of training for church leaders that allowed them to say, okay, we're dealing with three things here. When somebody comes into my office with this problem, we're dealing with his problem. We're dealing with now, even though it's not her fault, her problem. And then there's an our problem. And if there was equal focus placed on each of those three problems, then we could expand that picture. And so a church leader or bishop, ecclesiastical leader of some sort would be able to not only go to Scott and say, man, we're so glad you're back and let's work through this and repentance is possible, but then he'd be sensitive enough to come to you and say, wow, I imagine your world is pretty upside down right now. And I think just some simple basic training on what the trauma response is and on what attachment is in a relationship, and then an understanding of the process, the actual process of forgiveness, without just the words of, oh, time to forgive him, like it's over. It's more of like, no, okay, if I have the world ripped out from underneath my feet, I no longer know who to trust or what's actually real in my life. And I'm looking for stability, and the place where I want stability is the place where I can't trust right now. That's a really scary, hard place to be in. And what I need is a way to have some security, a place to ground myself, a place to be reassured that I'm not crazy, a place to be met with extreme, we call it ridiculous patience, where I'm allowed to be able to step into this process of forgiveness. And I would love it if church leaders were trained and, in the terms of the process of forgiveness, to think about it in terms of grieving instead, where forgiveness is this process of true grief, where I have to go through pretty much all of those stages where there's going to be denial about it. I'm going to try to like wrap my head around how this couldn't be happening to me. This isn't the world I signed up for. This isn't the guy I thought I married. Like, and then it moves into, anger, and there's this frustration and anger and bitterness that can only naturally happen when we feel like we've had something taken from us, or there's something that we have to protect. And a lot of times a betrayed spouse feels like she has to protect a lot of things that are hard to speak, things like values and things like other beliefs and what to do about the kids and all of this, what else they don't know, and all of this stuff they feel like they got to protect. So of course there's going to be anger, and then the anger can move into, sadness or depression. And then there's the bargaining of like, well, with God or with your husband or whoever else. And before you finally nestle into this place of acceptance, which is, okay, I don't like this, but this is the reality of my life. And I think I can still be with this man. I think he's still a good man with flaws, but that sometimes takes years. And if it's pressed hard to get through it, it actually exacerbates all of those stages because there's no room for those stages to actually be processed.
Yeah.
And I feel like too, like I loved the prodigal son part of confession. Like it felt really nice. But I kind of wish after that, like that's still a great thing, like I know my bishops love me and that they felt for me and they were so happy that I was now trying to work on this problem. And so I really would have wished like two things. One, that they wouldn't be quite so scared to use the word addiction, be like, I feel like you are definitely dealing with an addiction, and maybe even asking me, how often has this happened? Can we just lay out a timeline? Like what's the longest time you've gone without struggling with this, and just, because that's not something somebody likes to lay out for themselves, because that's not really, I wanted to be a paleontologist when I grew up. I didn't want to be an addict. It's not something you put on one of those things that you want to be someday. And so it's not it's not very easy to to admit it. And if I would have had a little bit of help, just trying to lay out, like, it looks like you've never gone more than, with the exception of your mission, you've never gone more than like a year without doing this. So this is definitely an addiction that we're dealing with. So that would have been extreme, because that's when my life made sense. And it's like, oh, I'm not doing this because I'm a horrible person. I'm not doing this because I hate my spouse, because I love my spouse, you know? And so nothing made sense in my life, but that was kind of the missing puzzle piece for me. And the other thing is, after the whole prodigal son moment, I wish they would have sat me down and, like you said, was it ridiculous patience?
Yeah.
And you need to have a ridiculous amount of patience for your wife right now, because you've done a lot of things that hurt her really bad, and she is in a space where she doesn't know if she can trust you. Like, don't expect her to forgive you tomorrow. That's something you can work on. It's definitely something you need to work on. But she's going to have some days where she looks like she's doing good, and then 5 minutes later, she could be in the gutter. And that doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. That doesn't mean that she's doing something wrong. That's just the process of recovery from being betrayed. Sorry, because I remember that I kind of thought Melissa was out to get me when she was dealing with her betrayal trauma, because she would just all of a sudden like be happy, and then all of a sudden she'd be like, "Why'd you do this to me? I can't believe that you did this." And I'm like, "What, are you trying to make me feel horrible?" Like, you know, and then I would guilt her, and then, which I realized later was manipulating. But
Right.
it was just
I love how in your example somehow it still came back to you. The fact that she was hurting was like, why are you doing this to me? I'm good now. Like, stop hurting me. Instead of going like, man, babe, I can't believe you're still hurting so bad. Like, what do you need from me? Right.
exactly.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you're saying, and what you're saying, I think what you're saying, Scott, is that you're saying that you would love some of that education up front to say, hey, look, this recovery process, as much as it is your recovery, it's not just about you. And
Mhm.
and if you understand that, if you can just simply understand that your wife is going to, without being crazy, just because of the nature of what she's going through, she's going to probably be all over the map emotionally from time to time. And
Yeah.
that's not her fault. Like, that's just going to be part of the process. And if you understand that, then you're going to be more tooled up to actually step into this space and be able to hold that space for her and with her, instead of go, geez, when are you going to get over this? Like, stop hurting me. Like, I'm doing better. Like, you know, and it doesn't help when that's a natural part of the process in the marriage. And then a partner is going, well, where do I turn then? Because I can't feel like I can talk or show my feelings to my husband right now. The next best place for them to turn normally is to their church leader.
Yeah.
And when they go to a church leader, and the church leader sort of like pats you on the head and goes, okay, just get out there and forgive him. And then you're like, am I nuts? Like, why am I a bad person because I honestly am having a hard time with these feelings? And instead, if you were met around that corner with, yeah, this is really, really tough. Like, of course you're hurting, and here's this process that we call the grieving process. And it looks like you may be in one of these stages right now, and that's okay. Like, I'm here for you. We're here to, take as much time as you need, and of course there's going to be the spiritual coaching that comes along from a church leader too, where they're going to help teach those like core Christian principles, but they're not going to be forced. They're going to be just there to be grasped onto as you move through the process of, grieving and ultimately acceptance and forgiveness. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
That totally describes
it is a
Melissa's.
process. It's totally a process. And I found it very difficult because I was going through that process alone, right? And I felt like this is such a dark and shady thing that we were going through. So it's like you
You
didn't
don't want to talk
to
to
share.
your family members. You don't want to
No.
talk to your friends and be like, hey, I'm having a really rough time. Oh, why? Well, my husband's struggling with pornography. Oh, okay. Well, Yeah, that's just
Well,
not
yeah, it's just something people don't want to talk about, and I don't blame people for not wanting to talk about it, but it has to change because I felt very lost and very alone, and my concept of my reality and of my life was just kind of robbed, right? Like everything that I thought that our marriage was founded on wasn't true, and so then I had to grieve what it was, and I was also afraid of my future because I didn't know what I was going to do with my kids, myself, and it was just for me. Like I know I went through stages of depression where I just had a dark cloud of life, and I was just surviving, and I feel um, like when I would talk to a church leader, they'd be like, "Well, we don't want you to feel alone because there's so many couples that deal with this," and but they wouldn't give me resources, and so you feel alone, and that's really hard, but you shouldn't feel alone, and then that was it. And so I feel like when I finally knew that we were dealing with an addiction, I knew where I could go for help, and I found women that could relate to my feelings, and then it just kind of opened a world up that I didn't know was there. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And having that team becomes so important because it really becomes that stabilizing force you almost fall into. It's like a safety net that kind of goes, look, you're not crazy, and have you thought about this, and let's pick you back up, and let's keep you moving, and just having that. So what I'm hearing you say, maybe you could just speak to this a little bit more, Melissa, is, having been through what you're in the process of going through right now and knowing what you've been through, if you had the perfect world and you had to start this thing all over again, what would have been the ideal sort of response? What would you have needed? What could have been provided by a church leader that would have been the most helpful for you?
The most helpful for me, I think, if they were educated and if they just kind of saw me, that would help. And I don't know if that makes sense because I felt like I would go into an office and it was just very linear, like this is what happened, and but they didn't see the gaslighting, like the psychological abuse, right? And so
what is it that you wish that they would have said to you? Like maybe something
No.
like, you have been betrayed, and so these are some.
I feel like education would have been the biggest thing. Like knowledge is power. I feel like if one of them was just said, I think you're experiencing betrayal trauma, and I think the best thing you could do for yourself is to research it and to discover what it is and see if you can relate to any of the similarities. I think that would have moved mountains for me because it validated my feelings. And I think for Scott, if they asked him to do the same thing, that he would have realized, like, these are normal processes and normal feelings that Melissa's going through, and how can I support her? Because what I've realized is in regards to like healing, if Scott's not on the path of recovery, I can still find healing for me. But for him to find true healing, he needs to find restitution and to help those that he's hurt, right?
Yeah. I wish that would have been nice too, is for them to say like, okay, like part of this repentance process for you is going to be restitution. And part of restitution is going to be you learning about how your wife feels as a betrayed spouse. And I remember reading watching the videos of Brennan's how to help her after shattering her heart. And it was just mind blowing, just like learning about holding space and things like that, because I would feel so alone because Melissa would be triggered by, anything that happened. And then I'd like, what do I do? Do I, and knowing that betrayal trauma was a thing. I'd never heard of that term before I found out about Brennan's stuff. And maybe even just we found a lot of excellent books and things on on betrayal trauma, and we even gave one to our bishop, and we're like, just keep this in your desk for the next person that needs it, and
Yeah.
Awesome. So if I'm going to kind of sum up what you guys just said here, you're saying that basically what you would have really appreciated was some education on the process of what you guys were going to be going through, which even though you were never introduced to anybody else, that's probably maybe the most common thing that any church leader gets through their office is you guys' story.
Yeah.
And so if a church leader is educated on both sides, on all three, on let's just say his addiction, hers betrayal trauma, and the hours of what it's actually going to take to rebuild trust over the process of time. If a bishop or a church leader understands that process, they could use some of that knowledge just to at least steer you in the right direction to say, hey, look, like this is a thing, like it's a pretty common thing, and there's a way through this, and here's a good place to go start. And so you're saying education on the part of the church leader that could then lead to some resourcing so that they could say, it's not like the church leader needed to be the end all, answer all, be all for you.
no, not at all.
No, they just needed to be almost this conduit for you to say, okay, let's get you in the right path here where you can have the right kinds of support, you can get the right kinds of education, you can start to build the right kinds of tools to start climbing out of this hole. And then just be there continually as sort of a spiritual, emotional support on both sides as you then go through the process that you're going to go tackle.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying? Awesome. Yeah. I think that that's something that, as I work with a ton of church leaders, I mean, it's like, I think just because of the nature of the specialization that Brandon and I both do with sexual addiction, betrayal trauma, it's often so closely connected to, especially these Christian, the Christian values here, that I sometimes feel like church leaders are my second client, where I'm talking with them frequently all the time. And by and large, most of them, I have a standing offer that says any church leader who wants to come meet with me, I'll take them to lunch for free if they'll just let me talk, just because I want them to have that education that says, oh, I know what to do. And I think it really empowers a church leader to have that education.
Totally.
I think they're well intended, but I wonder if sometimes they don't even know where to go to get the resources or get the help that they need to then be able to do what you guys just said. And so in some ways with your question, it's almost like the question needs to be flipped onto you and onto anybody else who's listening right now, who's going through similar things, is how do I help my church leaders get the education they need to help me and everyone else that's going to come after me?
Exactly.
Right. And that's in some ways it almost helps your own recovery to think of it that way now, because now you're going to have some purpose for why you've been through the things that you've been through, and it's going to give you a chance to be empowered at helping whoever you come in contact with that might be in the position of trying to be the first line of defense with other people. I know Brandon has a bunch of resources. We have right now, for those of you listening and who might be interested in sharing with your own church leaders, on lovestrong.com, there's a free church leader course for how to handle sexual addiction. And we're currently developing one on betrayal trauma that should be done by the end of October. And they're just free resources for any church leader who just has some questions and who wants some understanding. And by all means, you guys, please feel free to use that resource and share it with whoever you can, so that we can kind of spread the word here, because I think you're right. It's so pivotal. I mean, I can't tell you, like, just from my perspective, Brandon and I are usually like the last line of defense when people are falling apart and there's marriages on the rocks and it's looking like a divorce, and the last ditch effort is to come in and get counseling. One of the factors that is really vitally important and that seems to shine through is that when we work with a couple who has come through a church leader who knows, the prognosis is so much better. You've got that extra support, you've got that extra level of like spiritual care that's going on. There's this added patience. It's almost like there's this piece of structure that gets put in to go along with the 12-step and the therapy and the books that you're reading, and that the power of a well-informed church leader it's immeasurable. And I think if we were to take that kind of approach with the church leaders that we're dealing with and say, hey, look at the impact for good that you can have, because I think a lot of times they hear, oh, he's failed me again. I mean, how many? It takes it is like one of the hardest jobs in the world to be a church leader, because even when you've got really good intentions, somehow you let people down. But if we could build them up and say, hey, look at the impact for good that you can have if you would just take a little bit of extra time to understand X, Y, and Z. It could be really, really beneficial for a lot of people. Go ahead, Scott.
If I just add something quick, I just don't want to put across the impression that I want my church leader to be a counselor for me, but it's just, or for us. But when your belief system requires confession to a church leader in order for worthiness to return, then that's what kind of puts the church leader on the first line of defense, and that's kind of how he ends up being the first person that we talk to, because as far as our belief system goes, that in order for me to be worthy, again, confession to a church leader is necessary. And so, yeah, like you said, just if they could just be a conduit to just get people connected, that would just be really awesome.
Great. I think it's good that you reemphasize that. I think sometimes this is just a human thing that we all do, is that when somebody brings us a problem, we think we have to be the one to fix it. And what you're saying is that a really good church leader doesn't necessarily need to have to be the one to fix it. They need to fulfill the role that they are, which is that, whatever common judge in Israel, place for confession and a place for support. And if they just had a little bit of understanding and education on what betrayal trauma was, especially, and addiction, then it would just be this easy, seamless transition into added support and education. And then they could just really continue to fulfill their role as your emotional and spiritual kind of advisor and support. And I think that that's really important, is that we all, and church leaders included, can understand that they don't have to be the solution. That in a lot of ways, ultimately, God's going to be the solution, and God can work through a lot of other channels. And if that church leader can just open up the channels, then God can take care of the rest with right effort and right work on the part of the couple. So excellent. Any other questions, you guys, or thoughts?
Not too much. I was just thinking about what you just last said, because for me, when I was in my darkest place, I didn't want him to be with me, right? Like, obviously.
Sure. Of course.
But like what you said about God, like that's where Christ comes in. He crawls into those darkest places with us. And that's where I found solace. And that's where I knew he was real. And like, I know, like, sometimes one of the questions that I'd come into my head is like, how can God be real since this happened? Like, why would he do this when I'm doing all that I can to stay on this right path? And why would he let this happen? And, I've been thinking about that question a lot, and it's just, I know it's because I can evolve into a person, and God can take our hardest and most darkest places, and he can make them into a miracle. And I know, like, at the beginning process, it doesn't feel like that would ever happen. I remember it was, I think, 5 months after our last confession, that we were at the park and our kids were playing and we were laughing. And I remember my face hurt, and I was like, why does my face hurt? And I realized it was because I was smiling so much. but it took
Those
me,
muscles hadn't been worked out for a while.
no. And I cried tears of joy. And, that was like 5 or 6 months after. And I went from a place where I thought I'd never be happy to that place. And then I thought, oh, it's finally behind me. And then the next day later, I got hit with this is my reality track, right? And it's like, that's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, that truck likes to back up and run you over.
Yeah, it keeps coming around. It's a loop, but the road gets longer, and that's okay, right? And
Yeah,
knowing you're not alone, right, with God and with your fellow man is huge. Right?
What a beautiful story. I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I think you illustrated a point that I think is really, really common for someone who's been betrayed, is that one of the byproducts is that it often causes this questioning and struggle and almost crisis of faith that goes along with the betrayal doesn't just stay in the realm of sexuality, it touches everything. And when there's this struggle, this wrestle, I believe it's a necessary wrestle that we all have. But to hear how you've come through your wrestle and how you've been able to access that portal of, where what a great story that you were shocked that your face was hurting because you'd been smiling. Like, that is what a beautiful story. And maybe I'll just end with this thought to go along with what you were saying. It's just a little short stanza of a poem that I believe is just kind of true for all of us, whether it's betrayal trauma or whether it's addiction or whether it's any other form of struggle in our lives. We can go to God, and every one of us at some point can say, why? Like, I'm doing everything right, or this isn't fair, it's not good. But this poem rings through my head when I think of those things, and it just says, all who journey soon or late must pass within the garden's gate and kneel alone in darkness there and battle with some fierce despair. God pity those who cannot say, not mine, but thine, who only pray to let this cup pass away and cannot see the purpose of Gethsemane. And I think it's just part of the natural process that we have to do that wrestling. But as we do that wrestling, if we'll submit ourselves to that process, and if we have room to do that wrestling, then inevitably we end up finding where we need to be, and we end up finding the deeper connections that we need, not just with our spouse, but more confidently inside of ourselves, and ultimately with God, with our higher power. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this today. Awesome question, awesome discussion. You guys' story sounds incredible too. So thank you so much for sharing yourselves.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
You bet.
For this opportunity.
You guys, if you appreciate what Scott and Melissa have shared with you today, and you know somebody who might be able to benefit from this, whether it's other couples that might be struggling, or especially your church leaders who might benefit from some education, please share this. Please rate it. It's the way that we can reach other people. And you guys have an awesome day.